Once again, good morning. We are a covenantal community founded on love and a common devotion to our free faith. We welcome each other into this virtual space. We especially welcome our visitors. Perhaps you are new and seeing this on YouTube page later. We are so glad that you are here. We invite you to connect with us in comments or via our website or Facebook page. Our church website and Facebook page have information about our activities. Also, members and friends, please remember that the best way to stay updated on congregational news is to read the Newsnet emails, the weekly e-blast, the monthly online newsletter, and our Facebook posts. We are about to enter sacred time. We are about to make this time and this place sacred by our presence and our intention. Breathe. Let go of the expectations placed on you by others and those they taught you to place on yourself. Drop the guilt and the shame, not to shirk accountability, but in honest expectation of the possibilities of forgiveness and new thought. Let go of the thing you said the other day. Let go of the thing you dread next week. Be here in this moment. Breathe. Here. The flame of our chalice this morning is a symbol of the warmth and brightness of our connections. The flame lights our way back the flame lights our way back together each week from our separate lives, and it lights our way forward into the promise of renewal. The flame of our chalice this morning is a symbol of the warmth and brightness of our connections. The flame lights our way back. Now our opening music. Our opening words this morning are from a song called Safe Harbor with a little bit of revision by Michael McLean. There are refugees among us. They don't carry flags or signs. They are standing right beside us in the market checkout lines. And the war that they've been fighting may or may not be televised, but the story of their need for love is written in their eyes. This is a call to arms, to reach out and to hold the evacuees from the dark. This is a call to arms, to lead anguished souls to safe harbors in our hearts. In our meditative music this morning, I want you to concentrate on your breathing. Breathe in and out and find your comfortable spot. We also invite you to share your joys and sorrows via the chat box while our meditative music plays, and afterwards, I will call them into the air. I have no joys and concerns, but let us keep everyone in our thoughts and our prayers. I'm going to turn it over to Carl to introduce our speaker, Linda Wilson.
Thank you, Anna. Those are some lovely opening words. We really appreciate those. I'm so delighted to welcome our friend and former member of the Tuscaloosa congregation, Linda Wilson. Linda and her family were here for a number of years in the 80s and 90s and were a big part of our congregation. Linda was a professor and associate dean at the UA School of Nursing, and then she moved on to take the deanship, associate deanship up at UAB School of Nursing. And while there, she also led their initiative in global health. More recently, Linda has led the establishment of a refugee interest group within the Unitarian Universalist Church in Birmingham. Following that initiation in 2019, she put together a coalition of multi-faith organizations, and they were incorporated as a charitable 501c3 nonprofit. Linda is the president of that group. And she will tell us, I'm sure, of the work of their volunteers and so forth. We're going to introduce the topic that Linda brings us with a short video that features some of her members and some of their clients, and after which Linda will jump in with her presentation. She'll also stay with us for our coffee hour for some discussion. Thank you.
I wanted to just chime in and acknowledge Pam Powell, a friend of mine from the Unitarian Church in Birmingham, did that video. She is, some of you may know, a project she's embarked on to produce documentaries about the civil rights struggle. And it started with an interest in showing the work of Unitarians in Birmingham as partners in that in that struggle. And she produced the first documentary last fall focusing on the vote. And now it's turned, one documentary is turned into 8, but she graciously did this video for us. We used it for our fundraising campaign last fall. She's a wonderful videographer. So I appreciate Pam. Well, I'm going to go ahead now and share my screen, and maybe for 10 or 12 minutes. And Carl, can you help me so that I don't speak too long? I want to make sure not to go over time and that we can then have time for some discussion. But I'm going to share my screen and just give you a little bit more background than was presented in that movie. First, to start with a little bit of some definitions, because when we first began this work, it was all new to me. I had not done anything during my nursing career really with refugees and asylum seekers. So I'll share a few definitions, a little bit about US current immigration policy as it relates to refugees and asylum seekers, and then finish up with talking about the development of ALIRP. So first, the definition of refugee was approved back in 1951 by the United Nations, and then it was reaffirmed in 1967, and it hasn't changed. In essence, it means that people who have a credible fear of persecution based on some affiliation in a group, such as its race, religion, political affiliation, nationality. Asylum seekers meet those same criteria, but unlike refugees who are approved, so to speak, and vetted by the United Nations High Commission on Refugees before they go into a resettlement country, asylum seekers cross a border and then present themselves, in the case of the US, to the US Customs and Immigration Service or to Border Patrol to request asylum, but they must prove that they meet that same criteria of a credible fear of persecution. Another term that we hear a lot, unauthorized immigrant. Sometimes people hear the term undocumented, illegal, illegal alien. And these are individuals who are here in the United States or in another country without authorization. And we do have many people here in the United States in that category. And then the last definition I wanted to mention, because it's a group our organization is working with, are unaccompanied, sometimes unaccompanied minors, unaccompanied alien children. These are children who have crossed the border under the age of 18, and they do not have a legal guardian at the time that they cross the border. In 2019, there were over 1,000 unaccompanied minors who settled in Alabama, 180 in Jefferson County. And our group has started to work with sponsors of those children. I'll tell you a little bit about that. In the United States, the refugee resettlement process all goes through our State Department, which works with the United Nations High Commission on Refugees. And this, if a refugee is approved by the State Department to come into the United States, the State Department works with 9 umbrella resettlement agencies. And those agencies have affiliates in communities across the United States. Most of them are like social service agencies. These 9 umbrella groups, most are faith-based. You can see them here: Church World Service, Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, the U.S. Conference on Catholic Bishops, Lutheran Immigrant Services, etc. If the U.S., for some reason, I'm sorry, my screen isn't working too well. If one of these agencies, these 9 agencies, say we'll accept a refugee, they work with their affiliates in communities across the US. Up until last fall, the only agency in Alabama that did refugee resettlement was Catholic Social Services in Mobile. That was an affiliate of the US Conference on Catholic Bishops. Last fall, an affiliate of the Lutheran Agency, opened an office in Birmingham. It's called Inspiritus. So now we have 2 refugee resettlement agencies in Alabama. If the refugee maybe has some tie to Alabama, that's often how they end up here as opposed to going to another state. Or it could be that the umbrella organization, one of those 9, just wants to evenly distribute the workload among their affiliates. So that those are the decisions about where people get settled. Once an agency, for example, Inspiritus here in Birmingham, says we will take these refugees, the agency receives money from the State Department. It's about $2,125 per refugee. In return, they must provide at least 90 days of social service, and there's a checklist of things they must do. They help people find jobs, they help people find housing, get into English classes, etc. At the end of those 90 days, they don't have an obligation to continue services. Some of them do. And in fact, the Lutheran group here in Birmingham has agreed they'll be available for up to 5 years if the refugee needs that help. But if they don't have the services, groups like ours step in and we provide ongoing support as needed. In the United States, the president is the person who determines how many refugees come into the country every year. And you can see the chart here back in 1980, after the conflict in Kosovo, there were over 200,000 admitted per year. You can see what happened between 2016 and 2020 when President Trump was in office. It reduced from over 100,000 to 15,000 a year. President Biden has promised to increase the cap to 125,000 a year. Now, with what's happening in Ukraine and more recently in Afghanistan, that number hopefully will go up. We don't know what's going to happen. Briefly, I want to tell you that, so that's in a nutshell the refugee resettlement process. The asylum process is very different because there's no government support for asylum seekers. There's 2 ways people can request asylum. Affirmative asylum, within 180 days of crossing the border, someone goes to a border patrol officer and says, I would like asylum. And they present as much evidence as they have. Some of them bring documentation from their countries about, I was shot by the government or whatever. If they do not get approved, and most of them do not, they then can go into our immigration court system in what's called defensive asylum process, and a judge will ultimately decide their fate. Right now, our court system is extremely backlogged. There's over 1.5 million people in the United States waiting for their asylum court dates. And so it's taking an average of 721 days from the time an asylum application is submitted until people have their day in court. The denial rates are widely disparate depending on which court you go to in the US. And Syracuse University tracks these rates so you can look and see what your chances are. The people we work with in Birmingham are generally assigned to the court in Atlanta, which has one of the lowest rates in the country. The approval rate in Atlanta is 2%.
Why would that be?
So it's very.
Well, where's the biggest?
We'll get to these questions in a little bit.
Amazing.
So these asylum seekers have many challenges: inconsistency, uncertainty, long wait times. Applying for a work permit, many times the law changes quite a bit, but they often have to wait at least 150 days after applying for asylum before they can even apply to work here legally. We are currently working with several families who have been waiting over a year for a response to their work permit applications. And our group does not have enough money to completely support people during these years. So we're helping people with rent and other expenses as we can, but most of them are having to work under the table. Sometimes they don't get paid and they have no recourse. So there's lots of challenges for asylum seekers. So given all of that context, I'm just going to briefly tell you about our organization. We're a diverse group of individuals, religious leaders, faith leaders, and we came together and became a 501c3, as Carl said, in 2019. We specifically state we don't proselytize or promote any particular religion or political group, and our volunteers are very aware of that. Being that we're an interfaith group, we wanted to make sure that people who join know that we're not in the business of trying to get people to come to our church, that kind of thing. As Carl said, this started in 2016 in the Unitarian Church in Birmingham. You all may have seen the movie Defying the Nazis that was produced about a Unitarian minister and his wife during World War II, who the Sharps, who went to Europe to try to help many Jewish people escape. And our church showed that film as one of our film series events. And in our discussion, I raised my hand to say, well, what can we do here in Birmingham that, you know, the refugee crisis is almost as severe as it was after World War II. And what happens, all of us know, when you raise your hand and ask about something, they say, well, why don't you be in charge and start something here in the Unitarian Church? And that's how we started the interest group. And it was the idea of our then president, Virginia Volker, at the Unitarian Church. We immediately started reaching out to other groups, especially the Birmingham Islamic Society, but other groups. We formed last year something called the Greater Birmingham Immigrant Resource Network, so that all organizations that help immigrants of any kind in Birmingham meet monthly on Zoom to share information. We've also worked with this Inspiritus agency to help them get their approval from the State Department to open an office in Birmingham in September. So far, that group has welcomed 57 Afghan allies to Birmingham, and many of our volunteers are on care teams for Inspiritus. So we have a very close relationship with the Refugee Resettlement Agency, but we are focusing primarily on asylum seekers since there is no one else doing that work in Birmingham. So I'm not sure why sometimes my clicker isn't working. So when we started as an interest group, we decided on a 3-part mission, which remains our mission today. That's education, advocacy, and direct support of refugees and asylum seekers. Before we became a 501c3, we helped resettle a refugee family from Colombia that was resettled by Catholic Social Services, but they had a connection in Birmingham, and that's why they came here rather than Mobile. We also helped a family from Syria who were lucky enough to get a lottery visa before President Trump ended that system. We helped them. That's the family from Colombia, and they're doing very well now. They've actually purchased a home. The next phase, we learned about a group in West Virginia called the West Virginia Interfaith Refugee Ministry. And we kind of decided to expand, still under the Unitarian Church, to start doing direct financial support of asylum seekers. And this was the first family we helped. They were referred to us from Casa Marianella, a shelter in Texas, a mother and her children from Angola, who had walked 1,800 miles after flying to Ecuador to end up in Birmingham. There's also an immigration detention facility in Gadsden, Alabama called Etowah, and we helped to sponsor a young man from Haiti to get him out of that detention facility while he was awaiting the appeal of his asylum court hearing, Francois. And so we supported him for almost 2 years. He ultimately lost that appeal and was deported to Haiti. So when we started doing this direct financial support, it became cumbersome to operate under the board of the Unitarian Church and all the financial things. So that's basically why we became a 501c3. So we have an 11-member board, a board committee, and 7 advisory committees. And that's how all of the work gets done, through volunteers who work on those committees. We hired our first paid staff last August, an AmeriCorps Vista service member. You heard from her on the video, and we are now recruiting for 2 additional service members. UAB has a great program. There's a grant where the nonprofit only pays half of the salary and UAB pays the other half. So we've been able to get a full-time Vista service member for $6,500 this year. And we're adding to that. So if you know of young people who speak Spanish and would like a wonderful opportunity, we would welcome their applications. Our volunteers who provide direct support to families work on care teams. And as you heard in the video, they do many things. They provide transportation, either to English classes, grocery stores. People cannot get a driver license until they get asylum. And so you heard people are waiting 3 to 4 years. The bus system in Birmingham is really not very good. So they need a lot of help with transportation, registering for school, English, many different things. We have a whole system for orienting volunteers, and we have a volunteer handbook. We do background checks for anybody who's going to do this direct support with families. In 2020, just after we became a 501c3, we were providing support for 7 families. It jumped to 18 families last year, and now we're supporting 19 families or 54 individuals. And we expect that number only to keep increasing. We, part of our education mission, do a lot of educational programs with COVID. Most of them have been on Zoom. We've had film nights, book discussions. We partnered with StoryCorps last year and recorded interviews with people who kind of had different political views around the topic of immigration to promote civil discourse about this topic, which can be pretty emotionally charged. And the links to those are on our website now. We've done a lot for advocacy, partnering mostly with larger national organizations such as Refugee Council USA, Episcopal Migration Ministry. They organize virtual advocacy days several times a year, and we then connect with our local congressional and Senate representatives. Mostly it's with their staff to try to educate them about the issues and bills that are currently before Congress. Last month, we worked with a group under Human Rights First to connect with Senator Shelby's office, because right now there's an urgent need for Congress to pass something called the Afghan Adjustment Act. And Senator Klobuchar and Chris Coons, Democrats, have co-sponsored this bill, but they really need a Republican co-sponsor. And Senator Shelby is chair of the Appropriations Committee, and it would be wonderful if he would co-sponsor that bill. What has happened is many Afghans had to leave so quickly. They did not qualify to get that pre-approved refugee status or special immigrant visa. And so they're all coming in under the same status I told you about asylum. You know how you have to go through the process of 3 to 4 years. You pay $5,000 to $10,000 to a lawyer to get an asylum application submitted. And this is just untenable for all these Afghans who the State Department authorized to be here because they've helped our military. I've been working with a number of them myself who are here in Birmingham, and the stories are heart-wrenching. So we've been trying to advocate for that Afghan Adjustment Act. So we've got lots of ways to get involved. Any of you who would like to sign up for our newsletter, I've put links here for the information on our webpage. We're also starting to reach out to many faith communities in Birmingham, but we'd welcome to do this in Tuscaloosa. Organizations such as churches who want to become an organizational partner can make a $500 a year donation, and individuals can become friends with a $50 a year annual donation. So maybe this is something that you all might want to consider in Tuscaloosa. We do have one family right now living in Cottondale. We generally have been doing our direct support only for families in the greater Birmingham area. But this family they had been in one of those Mexican, basically a refugee camp for a year and a half. And they were referred to us by an attorney who was trying to help them when they have a family a family member lives in a trailer in Cottondale. So in fact, I'm supposed to drive down there at 7 a.m. on March 21st to drive them for their ICE appointment up here in Birmingham. So we could actually use some partners in Tuscaloosa. I've connected them with a Catholic church in Tuscaloosa, so they've got some local help. But if any of you would be interested with that particular family, we would welcome that. I'm going to stop sharing and just open this up for any kind of questions or discussion. I know that was a sort of a whirlwind overview.
Well, thank you, Linda. I'm going to go ahead and move us along to the end of the service and then open it up for our coffee hour for more conversation. Thank you, Jim, for your question and getting us started. Our closing words are by Bishop Michael Reinhardt. I'm not going to tell you anything you don't know, but remind you of everything you know to be true in the Abrahamic tradition. There is a charge to care for the stranger who, for any reason, cannot go home. And now our closing music. The flame is extinguished, but not our hope for the future, our courage in the face of crisis, or the love we share in all the world. Go in peace.